Welcome to my channel. The engineering department fell silent. Every employee stared at the giant digital screen displaying the company's newest supercar design. Months of work. Millions of dollars. And the future of Titan Motors depended on that single blueprint. Daniel Brooks quietly pushed his cleaning cart into the room. For 8 years, he had worked as the company's night janitor. Most employees barely noticed him. To them, he was simply the man who emptied trash bins and cleaned the floors after everyone went home. As Daniel swept near the screen, he suddenly stopped. His eyes narrowed. Something wasn't right. He walked closer. The suspension layout on the blueprint caught his attention. Without thinking, he reached toward the touch screen and adjusted one small measurement. Only 3 millimeters. At that exact moment, the conference room doors opened. CEO Victoria Stone walked in with the board of directors. She froze. "What do you think you're doing?" Daniel stepped back. "I'm sorry, ma'am. I noticed a small design issue." Victoria laughed. "A janitor correcting my engineers?" The executives chuckled. Daniel remained calm. "I wasn't trying to disrespect anyone. I just thought." Victoria cut him off. "You thought? My engineering team includes graduates from the best universities in the world. And you expect me to believe the janitor knows better?" She pointed toward the door. "You're fired. Leave your badge and get out." Daniel quietly removed his employee badge and placed it on the conference table. "I'm sorry for causing trouble." He picked up his cleaning cart and walked toward the exit. As the door slowly closed behind him, one of the senior engineers suddenly turned pale. He zoomed in on the exact area Daniel had touched. His hands began to shake. "Ma'am." Victoria frowned. "What is it?" The engineer swallowed hard. "If we had built the car using the original design, the suspension would have failed during high-speed testing." The entire room went silent. Victoria looked at the corrected blueprint. Then toward the door Daniel had just walked through. Only 5 minutes had passed. And she suddenly realized. She had fired the only person who had just saved a $300 million project. Victoria rushed into the hallway. "Find Daniel Brooks." Security officers looked confused. "Ma'am, didn't you just fire him?" "I know what I said. Just bring him back." Meanwhile, Daniel was quietly clearing out his small locker. Inside were a faded photo of his daughter, Emma, a lunchbox, and an old notebook filled with engineering sketches. As he zipped his bag, another janitor asked, "What happened?" Daniel smiled sadly. "I guess I touched something I shouldn't have." Before he could leave the building, a young engineer came running toward him. "Mr. Brooks, please don't go. The CEO needs you back." Daniel shook his head. "I've already been dismissed. The meeting is over." The engineer replied. "No. It has just begun." Back in the conference room, panic had replaced confidence. The engineers carefully examined Daniel's correction. One of them spoke. "The load calculations were completely wrong. If we had built the prototype, the front suspension would have collapsed at over 180 miles per hour." Another engineer added. "That could have killed the test driver." The room fell silent. Victoria slowly sat down. "How did none of us see it?" No one answered. A few minutes later, Daniel walked back into the room. Every executive stood up. Victoria took a deep breath. "Mr. Brooks, I owe you an apology." Daniel replied calmly. "I'm just glad someone checked the design before it was too late." Victoria looked puzzled. "How did you notice the mistake in just a few seconds?" Daniel hesitated. Then he quietly answered. "Because I helped design that suspension system, 25 years ago. The room went completely silent. One executive frowned. That's impossible. Daniel reached into his old notebook and placed several yellow drawings on the table. Each page carried the Titan Motors Company logo, along with his signature. A senior engineer picked up one of the documents. His eyes widened. These are the original prototype blueprints. He looked at Daniel in disbelief. You're Daniel Brooks? The engineer who created Project Falcon? Daniel nodded. I used to be. Victoria stared at him. If you were one of our top engineers, why have you been working here as a janitor? Daniel looked down at the photograph of Emma in his wallet. It's a long story. And one I never thought anyone here would care to hear.
Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Enjoy the video.
The room fell silent as everyone realized the quiet janitor had been hiding an extraordinary past. Daniel took a slow breath. I joined Titan Motors 25 years ago. I wasn't a janitor. I was one of the youngest senior design engineers the company had ever hired. The executives exchanged confused glances. Victoria asked quietly. Then why did you leave engineering? Daniel looked at the old photograph of Emma. 12 years ago, my wife became seriously ill. I spent every dollar I had trying to save her. When she passed away, I was left alone to raise our daughter. I couldn't work 80-hour engineering weeks anymore. So I resigned. Months later, when he needed a stable job with flexible hours, Titan offered him a position as a night janitor. It wasn't the job I dreamed of. But it allowed me to be there for my daughter. I've never regretted that choice. The room fell silent. Victoria turned toward human resources. Did anyone know who he was? The HR director looked embarrassed. His old engineering records were archived after the company merged. Nobody connected the files. One senior engineer shook his head. We've been walking past one of the greatest engineers in this company's history every single day. Daniel opened his worn notebook. Inside were dozens of hand-drawn designs. Some were improvements for current Titan vehicles. Others solved problems the engineers were still struggling with. I still love engineering. I just never stopped learning. The chief engineer flipped through the pages. His eyes widened. These solutions. We've spent 6 months trying to figure these out. Daniel smiled. Sometimes the answer isn't more complicated. It's simply looking at the problem differently. Just then, an urgent message appeared on the conference room screen. Prototype Falcon test vehicle ready for final validation. The chief engineer looked worried. Production starts tomorrow. If this design has one mistake, the entire project must be delayed. Victoria looked at Daniel. Mr. Brooks. I know I have no right to ask after what I did. But will you inspect the entire vehicle? Daniel remained silent for a moment. Then he nodded. If it keeps people safe, I'll help. The engineering team rushed to the prototype garage. As Daniel slowly walked around the unfinished supercar, he stopped after only a few seconds. His expression suddenly changed. This isn't the only problem. Everyone stared at him. Daniel pointed toward the rear of the vehicle. If I'm right, starting this engine could destroy the entire prototype. The room fell completely silent. The engineers immediately disconnected the battery. No one dared touch the prototype. Daniel slowly walked toward the rear of the car and knelt beside the exposed drivetrain. He removed a small inspection cover. After only a few seconds, he sighed. I was afraid of this. The chief engineer asked nervously. What did you find? Daniel held up a tiny steel retaining pin. It was cracked almost completely through. This pin locks the rear suspension under heavy acceleration. If it snaps at high speed, the suspension collapses. The driver loses control. Silence filled the garage. One engineer whispered, "We've inspected this car 15 times. Daniel replied, "You inspected it with computers. I inspected it with experience." Victoria looked stunned. "Can it be fixed?" Daniel nodded. "Yes. But first, I need to know who approved this redesign." The chief engineer opened the project records. A single name appeared. Michael Grant. Victoria frowned. "He resigned last week." Daniel looked thoughtful. Did he resign? Or leave before anyone discovered his mistakes? The team began reviewing every design Michael had approved. Within an hour, they found several hidden calculation errors. Each one could have caused catastrophic failures. One executive whispered, "This isn't negligence. It's sabotage." The room fell silent. Victoria immediately ordered, "Stop all production. No vehicle leaves this factory until every system is checked." Daniel spent the next several hours working alongside the engineering team. Instead of criticizing them, he explained every correction patiently. "This bolt needs a stronger alloy. This bracket carries too much stress. This sensor should be moved 2 inches." The younger engineers listened carefully, taking notes. One of them smiled. "I've learned more today than I have in the last 2 years." Daniel simply replied, "Engineering isn't about proving you're the smartest. It's about making sure everyone gets home safely." Late that evening, the repaired prototype was ready. The chief engineer looked at Victoria. "Should we begin the test?" Victoria turned toward Daniel. "I want you to make the final decision." Daniel carefully inspected the vehicle one last time. Then he smiled. "It's ready." The prototype roared to life. Everyone watched the monitors as the test driver accelerated down the track. 100 miles per hour. 150. 200. The car remained perfectly stable. The control room erupted in cheers. But before anyone could celebrate, security rushed into the garage. One officer shouted, "Ms. Stone. We've located Michael Grant." And he wasn't acting alone. The celebration instantly stopped. The investigation was only beginning. Security officers escorted Michael Grant into the conference room. He looked calm. Almost too calm. Victoria stood up. "Michael. Did you sabotage prototype Falcon?" Michael smiled. "You finally figured it out." The room fell silent. The chief engineer couldn't believe it. "You could have killed someone." Michael shrugged. "I wasn't trying to destroy the company. I was trying to destroy its reputation." Victoria stared at him. "Why?" Michael laughed. "Our biggest competitor offered me $50 million. My job was simple. Delay your flagship project. Destroy customer confidence. And make Titan Motors lose billions." Several executives gasped. Daniel quietly folded his notebook. "I knew the mistakes were intentional." Michael looked surprised. "How?" Daniel replied. "Engineers make mistakes. But they don't repeat the exact same mistake in 5 different systems. Saboteurs do." Federal investigators entered the room moments later. One agent placed several documents on the table. "We've recovered encrypted emails. They prove Michael worked with executives from a rival company." Michael's smile disappeared. The agent continued. "You've also been recorded accepting illegal payments." Michael lowered his head. Without another word, officers placed him under arrest. As he was led away, he looked back at Daniel. "If you hadn't come back, I would have succeeded." Daniel answered calmly. "Truth has a way of showing up." The next morning, Titan Motors held a company-wide meeting. Every employee filled the main auditorium. Victoria walked onto the stage. She looked directly at Daniel. A week ago, I judged a man by his uniform. I saw a janitor. I failed to see the engineer. She turned toward the employees. That mistake almost cost this company everything. The audience applauded. Victoria then held up a new employee badge. It read, Daniel Brooks, Chief Engineering Advisor. She smiled. Mr. Brooks, this position is yours if you'll accept it. Daniel looked at the badge for several seconds. Then he smiled. I'll accept. But under one condition. Victoria nodded. Name it. Daniel replied. No employee should ever be treated as unimportant because of their job title. The person cleaning the floor deserves the same respect as the person sitting in the boardroom. The audience rose to their feet. A standing ovation echoed through the auditorium. Just then, the company chairman hurried onto the stage. Victoria, you need to see this. He handed her a tablet. Her eyes widened. The world's largest automotive company has just offered to buy Titan Motors. But they have only one condition. Everyone looked toward Daniel. They want Daniel Brooks to lead the negotiations. The boardroom remained silent after Victoria read the offer. She looked at Daniel. The largest automotive company in the world wants to acquire Titan Motors. They have one condition. They'll only move forward if you're leading the engineering integration. Daniel smiled politely. I'm honored. But before I answer, I'd like to meet them. Victoria nodded. Done. A week later, representatives from the international company arrived at Titan Motors. Their chairman, William Carter, walked straight toward Daniel. They shook hands. Mr. Brooks, we've heard about your work. But that's not why we're here. Daniel looked surprised. It isn't. William smiled. 20 years ago, I attended an engineering conference. You gave a presentation on safe suspension design. I've kept my notes from that day ever since. Daniel laughed softly. I never imagined anyone would remember. William replied. Great teachers are never forgotten. The negotiations lasted all afternoon. When they finally ended, William stood before the board. We've changed our minds. The room became tense. Victoria asked. What do you mean? William smiled. We're no longer interested in buying Titan Motors. Several executives looked shocked. Instead, he continued. We want to become partners. We believe companies built on integrity should remain independent. The room erupted into applause. Victoria smiled with relief. I think that's the best decision for everyone. Later that evening, Victoria invited every employee to the factory floor. Janitors. Security guards. Receptionists. Engineers. Managers. Everyone stood together. Victoria stepped onto a small stage. A few weeks ago, I made the biggest mistake of my career. I judged a man by his uniform. She looked at Daniel. He reminded us that talent doesn't disappear because someone changes jobs. It simply waits for someone to notice. She then unveiled a bronze plaque at the factory entrance. It read, Every role deserves respect. Great ideas can come from anyone. The crowd applauded. 1 year later, Daniel was serving as chief engineering advisor while continuing to mentor young engineers every morning. He insisted that every new employee, regardless of position, attend the same orientation. His first lesson never changed. Respect people before you judge them. Skills can be taught. Character cannot. Emma, now older, visited the factory after school. She smiled as she watched engineers asking her father for advice. Dad, do you miss being a janitor? Daniel smiled. I was never ashamed of that job. Keeping a place clean is honorable. And helping people learn is even better. Emma nodded proudly. I've learned the same lesson. As the sun set over Titan Motors, Daniel looked across the busy factory where people from every department worked together with mutual respect. The company that had once fired him for touching a design had become a place where every voice mattered. And the CEO who had once judged him by his uniform had learned the most valuable lesson of all. Never underestimate a person because of the job they do. Like and subscribe.